Your Next Big Move podcast for anyone involved in the buying and selling of businesses that wants to know how to do it right. Hosted by Zoran and brought to you by Exclusive Business Sales. Sell your business with certainty.
Hello everyone. Today my guest is Larry Green. Larry is specialist in selling doctor surgeries and other medical businesses. We talk about specifics in selling medical businesses, valuations, and many other aspects of selling these types of businesses. Anyone running medical business or contemplating buying one will benefit greatly by listening to this conversation. So let's get into it. Hi Larry, and welcome to beautiful sunny Sydney.
And warm Sydney. It's
Warm
much better
Sydney.
than Melbourne was this morning.
I bet you it was.
Yeah, it was
How
cold.
cold was it?
Cold.
Cold.
Cold and wet.
And wet as well. Today, Larry Green joining me, who's a business broker for the last 20 years, and last 10 years has been selling medical practices. And we're going to have a conversation, hopefully useful to anybody who's thinking of selling their medical practice, looking to buy medical practice, or advises people in medical practices. So to kick us off, do you want to tell us a bit about what is happening in the industry that you operate in?
Well, the noise at the moment is pretty loud in the doctors are very hard to find, so there's a shortage of doctors. Secondly, there's also noise regarding the viability of practices who rely on bulk billing, because as you may be aware, the Medicare rebate has been frozen for some time. It was indexed, and I think they got a dollar something extra, so it was very little. And so that's a big problem. So a lot of practices are transitioning from bulk billing to what we would call a hybrid model, which is mixed billing, so mainly private. The other thing is I think that the buyer has changed a little bit over the last few years. There seems to be a lot of what I call corporate buyers, but corporate is a relative term because there could be, people who've got 4 or 5 practices up to 30 or 40 practices, or maybe even more than that. I'm not talking about the very, very big ones, 100 plus practices. I think that's a different marketplace entirely. Mm-hmm. But I think what did happen was that there was a lot of publicity about a couple of major sales in this corporate area, and numbers of $500 million, 500 million, were bandied around.
Thrown around,
yeah. And that of course makes people think that my little practice might be worth 10 times earnings.
At least half of that.
Yeah, half of that, yeah. So that's something I think that needs to be addressed, that not all practices are equal. The smaller practices do present a bit of a problem to sell because there's less likelihood that they can grow and develop. And also because of the shortage of doctors, there's also that issue that if 1 or 2 doctors don't stay within a practice once it's sold, then that has serious effect on
because it's hard to replace them.
Correct, absolutely.
So you mentioned shortage of doctors twice. So why is there a shortage of doctors? Where do doctors go?
I think it's a couple of reasons. One is probably local graduates are not going into general practice to the same extent that they were previously. Mm-hmm. And I think also that the overseas doctors have dried up a little bit. Obviously through COVID, we stopped, we closed borders, so people didn't come out here. And we've seen that there's been problems in a number of different industries where there's been shortage of qualified people and just general numbers of people. So it's not restricted just to the medical profession, but it is a serious issue. And
it's across the board and across the world as well. Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, the Australian government, and I think the Victorian government in particular, has brought in a number of nursing and medical people, but they're not going to go into general practice to start with. They're going to go into hospitals to look after the COVID patients and things like that.
And you mentioned some issues with medical bulk billing. Just so everybody understands, how much does the doctor get from the government when you go into practicing and get bulk bill?
I think that the current Medicare rebate is $39.10.
$39.10.
And that's for a consultation which lasts between 6 minutes, which is the minimum you can have,
Yeah.
and 19 minutes, because the next one cuts in at 20 minutes.
20 minutes. And
So-
what do they
So
get paid for that?
I think, I can't remember the exact figure, but let's assume that it's somewhere around about $70 or $80.
$70 or $80. So you're telling me if I'm really sick and I go see a doctor, he gets $39 for that?
Yeah.
I think it's worth a little bit more than
Yeah, I
that.
think so.
I'm just saying.
And that's been the problem, that it's been frozen. We indexed it, or the government indexed it, I should say, but they hardly got any extra money out of it. It was $38 and something. Now it's $39.10.
So as a consequence of that, more and more doctors are moving into this hybrid model where they charge some sort of gap or something on top of that.
Yeah. So most patients would be charged, at least for the initial consultation, what we would call the private billing level. Could be up anywhere between $75 and $95, depending on the practice, where it is, and the quality theoretically of the service provided. And then children under 16, pensioners, healthcare card holders, they would either not be charged, or they would be charged a small amount, because just to supplement the amount that the government is providing.
Okay.
It could be $5, $10, $20 at the maximum.
So when somebody selling or buying a practice, how do they look at it? Which one is more favorable, bulk billing or hybrid model, or does it really matter?
In purely from a financial performance point of view, and it's been easily demonstrated, you earn more money as a practice from private billing.
Yeah, because you charge more.
Can charge more. So it also, there's another aspect of it, that from a professional point of view for doctors, then they can afford to spend that 15, 20 minutes with a patient and still charge them that 95 or 75 or 85, whatever it is.
Okay, so there's no pressure
No
to
pressure,
perform
so
better service.
Correct. And so it's been said that when you transition from bulk billing to private billing, you do lose some patients, but they come back because they went to that practice not just because it's the practice, but it's the doctor that they were seeing. So they want to still see that doctor.
There's a relationship. Well, that brings us to another question. What happens when you sell a practice? And now we'll get into this more. Well, actually, let's do it now. Why do doctors sell businesses?
The most prominent reason that I've seen is that doctors have just got to the end of their tether. In other words, they've been running a practice. They've been not only seeing patients, but they've been also running the practice. And a lot of doctors are not as business orientated as others, so they found it harder. Some of them, through personalities, are more micromanagers. So in other words, they want to see everything, even though they might employ a practice manager to look after most of the day-to-day things. So it's a sense of being tired. I'd like to keep practicing medicine, is the usual phrase I get, but I don't want to be the boss.
Okay.
So on that basis, they're happy to keep working. Some will, depending on their age and their how sprightly they feel, they might work for 3 to 5 years. That's pretty good, because that's what the buyer will want.
Okay.
Is a sense that the practice is not going to look any different to a patient or the staff.
From patient's point of view.
Yes, so that all they're going to see is the same doctors there, different ownership, but they don't really know.
They wouldn't even know.
Who knows? Unless in a case where it's not a corporate buyer, then it may very well be that doctor who buys the practice may, over time, become part of the practice.
Okay.
So they'll see a new doctor coming in.
So you mentioned something that people will leave when you start charging them more, go somewhere else, and then come back to the doctor. So based on that, I'm putting 2 and 2 together. So if you change a doctor, there is a danger that patients won't warm up to a new doctor and go shopping around for the new GP.
There's a way of categorising patients which is not particularly flattering, but I've heard it on numerous occasions, that patients can be categorised as cats, rats and dogs.
Yeah.
Not flattering. I said not flattering.
Yeah, I know where you're going with that, but carry on.
So the dog patient will follow the master. So if a doctor leaves, they will tend to follow that doctor to go and join them in another practice. I'm a dog. my doctor moved from one practice to another, I followed him.
Okay.
The cats stay with the house. So they like the familiarity of the practice. They're comfortable. It's convenient. They know the other staff, the reception staff in particular. They're happy to stay. The rats are no loyalty whatsoever. They're the ones now probably using Health Engine or Hot Doc to make appointments that are convenient to them. They don't care who they see. They just want to see them now.
Okay.
And even that, because of the shortage of doctors, which we mentioned earlier, I think Health Engine said that sometimes it's taking up to 7 days to get an appointment even using that system.
Mm-hmm. So what happens when the doctor leaves but it doesn't go to another practice? What happens to those loyal patients?
Okay, let's say the doctor just retires fully.
Yep.
Health reasons, whatever, goes overseas, whatever the case may be. So those patients, if they're happy to stay within the practice, then they will tend to gravitate to one of the other doctors.
Okay.
All right?
But why wouldn't they be happy to stay in the practice?
Well, because if that doctor was a doctor they've been seeing for 30 years or 40 years in some cases, and that doctor disappears, who else are they going to see? So they should stay within the practice, as I said, because it's more convenient.
Well, I always think, and that's not just in medical businesses, but in any business, let's say accounting or anything, that you got that personal relationship with clients. It's better stranger I know than a stranger I don't know.
Yeah, the devil I know, the devil I don't.
Correct.
Exactly.
So if I was introduced to the new doctor, well, I'll give him a chance first. And if that doctor performs well and he's warm and I feel comfortable, well, I'm going to stay rather than going to total stranger now and going through the same process again. So there are ways that you can put some sort of mechanism in place to retain the patients.
Absolutely. But you got to remember that this is a personal, you use the term relationship, this is a very, very strong personal relationship between, for most people, with a doctor and them and their family.
Correct.
So what does loyalty mean in this case? Well, it means that I'm happy with this doctor on two levels. I'm happy because he understands medicine, and I feel confident that he's going to fix me up if I'm not well, whatever, or direct me to the next person who can do the right thing, a specialist.
Help, yes.
The other side of it is I like going there because he talks to me.
Yeah, I like the person on the other side.
Correct. Yeah. There's nothing. We used to use this phrase, bedside manner.
Yeah.
Some doctors are very, very good. Personal relationships are terrific. Other doctors, you just wonder why they became doctors, particularly at that primary general practice level.
Yeah.
Well, you have to talk to patients. You've got to listen and talk and get a sense of what's because there's always something else below things that I've got this problem, but if you ask questions, you can start to work out there's something else behind all this that really is the more important thing.
They want to talk about all.
Correct, and older patients, everybody hates going to the dentist, but a lot of older patients love going to the doctors. Why? Because it's a day out. They get to speak to somebody, and they get. And
it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt, and they don't pay any money.
Okay, so what about COVID? How did COVID impact how we go to doctors? Because there's a lot of online stuff now that's going on.
Tele-Health is certainly significantly increased. It's always existed. It's existed for a number of years, but mainly for rural, remote situations and specialists who couldn't get out to see patients.
Is it getting more hold in the cities at the moment?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's still some doctors who much more prefer to do telehealth than see patients face to face, particularly if we have these outbreaks of new variants in COVID and all that sort of stuff. So if we go back to that March-April period of 2020, it was very clear, because it happened to me, that practices went out of their way to dissuade you from going.
Going in, yeah.
Correct. And there was like a triage mechanism over the telephone. What's wrong with you? Can you wait? Da-da-da-da. When you went, my practice, as an example, stay in the car, ring us up, and we'll tell you when to come in. So there's no one in the waiting room. You go straight to the room where you're supposed to be seeing the doctor or the nurse or whatever.
Fully masked up with the hazmat suit.
Correct, and so there was that sense that we don't want you to be here because it's too hard to have you here. So you can see medical practice even now. There's half of the chairs in the waiting room.
Yeah.
There's barriers between you and the reception staff and all that sort of thing. So that's what happened. They did. So that first few months, there was articles in the trade magazines as well as trade papers and other sources, which clearly identified that some practices dropped by up to 40%.
Okay.
Because if they were privately billing, they couldn't privately bill. It was harder for them to privately bill, I think, on the Tele-Health system. So their income dropped even though they were probably doing the same number of consultations.
But there was also increase in the providers, and they're still around. You want to tell us a few words about these people or these businesses that still provide online service only?
Yeah, there's could be 20 or 30 of these Tele-Health businesses that are around. Some do the full consultations and supply services to doctors. Others provide only limited services such as repeat scripts or medical certificates, that sort of thing. So the market is modifying a little bit in that regard.
Okay. And how much impact that's got on general practitioners' business at the moment?
Well, if you're not seeing patients, you're not making money. That's the first thing. So
Okay, well, yeah, but
over time, obviously, patients started to go back into the practices.
Yeah.
There are still some modifications to that. As I said, the waiting rooms are generally less sparsely populated, but we're getting pretty close back to normality in that regard.
So if we go back to normal, are these, in your opinion, are these businesses that provide online health services gonna get negatively impacted, or are they here to stay?
I think it's here to stay in some form. But the government keeps changing the rules. You know, we're not allowing Medicare. We are allowing it on Medicare and that sort of stuff.
So it's still early days.
It's a little
to
bit
actually
flux, I think.
Predict.
Yeah.
So let's go to business of doctors' business.
Yep.
Why do they sell businesses?
As I think, I've already said this, that I think they're just tired. They've had enough of being the boss. They've had enough of going through this 2.5 years of difficulty. And we're getting a lot of people who I think are just getting to the end of their working life as the boss. Yep. So these are the baby boomers, the 65, 70-year-olds.
So they still want to practice medicine. They still can practice medicine, but they had enough of business and they want to exit.
Yeah, I think doctors compared to, say, dentists, in my experience and what I've spoken to other people about, dentists will get out much earlier. So in their early 60s at the most. Although you'll always get exceptions.
Yeah.
But doctors do tend to stay because they like most of them do like the interaction with their patients. They've been with their patients through, family events, children, grandchildren, all that sort of stuff, and older patients in particular who have complex needs, so to speak. The doctors don't want to lose those patients. They want to keep seeing those patients. So they're happy to keep practicing medicine, but not being responsible for the overall business.
So, and that's a good scenario because buyer comes in, buys the business, well, the doctor's going to stay there, so the transition is much easier and it's a less impact.
But you've got
clients.
two doctors or types of doctors. You've got the principal doctor, the doctor who owns the practice.
Yep.
And then you've got a whole lot of doctors, depending on the size of the practice, could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, who are subcontractors, independent of the practice. Now,
does it happen often that those contractors leave because the principal is not in charge anymore?
Depends. If my view on this is always do not make changes. Okay. If you buy a practice, then keep it as it is, because the doctors have got used to the way it's being run. They're paid, hopefully, on time, accurately, etc. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to go in and make wholesale changes, then you could upset one or two doctors who don't like the new approach. Okay, so
who are the buyers for those practices now?
Well, I think, as I said, there's probably more of these corporates of varying sizes, and complexities and etc. But I think there seems to be more and more of these. Now, is a corporate somebody who owns 3 practices, or do they have to own 10 to be considered as a corporate? I think if their mindset is
multi-practice
multi-practices, I think that would probably be a better way to put it.
There's also in my experience, group of people or doctors that will buy a single practice because they moved into the country, or they moved the region, or they moved interstate.
Yeah. There's also doctors who have worked for other practitioners.
Yeah.
And have taken the plunge and said, look, I'd like to have my own practice.
Okay. So any idea what the spread is on the market, one versus the other in terms of buyers?
My own personal thought is that we're sliding towards the multi-practice buyer.
Okay.
Away from the single doctor. When I first started it didn't seem to make any difference. There were investors, and they were people who may have only owned 1 or 2 practices, but weren't actually working in them. So either they weren't doctors, or they were doctors who chose to not work in that practice. Now I think we're seeing a lot more people buying practices that they have no intention of working in.
Okay. And in terms of the region, and mainly city versus country, or metropolitan versus regional, what are the differences there in terms of running practices and buyers and sellers and in transactions in general?
Okay. If we're looking at what we call international medical graduates, the IMGs, they've come to Australia, they've satisfied the Commonwealth government in that they have the right qualifications. They might have to go to a hospital to do some other training or whatever. And if they are GPs rather than specialists, then they were sent out into the regional areas. Mm-hmm. Because they had a 10-year moratorium where they couldn't work in the cities, in the major cities.
So let me just understand this. So if doctor comes from overseas, he has to work for minimum of 10 years in the regional centre.
Maximum of 10
years.
Yeah.
In regional centre. So what determines if he's going to work there for 3 or 10 years?
Well, the more remote they were, they went to very small towns. They might get less than 10 years. Spousal situations where husband and wife are both doctors, they might reduce it on that basis as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you can, in certain areas, get what is called a 19AB exemption.
Okay.
But these are not easy to get anymore.
So what's a 19AB?
Well, that's these doctors who are still have not satisfied the requirements of that moratorium, but you can get them in for a period of time to work in closer to the city, for instance.
Okay.
All right.
But in general, doctor coming into Australia has to spend some time working in regional area. That's how we provide the services to regional area before they can move to big.
So when I first started selling practices, the majority of my buyers were these overseas trained doctors who were getting either at the end of their moratorium or getting close to the end or had actually finished their 10 years or whatever they got.
So they coming now into
they want to come back into the cities, not just because they want to come back to the city, but there could be family reasons that family are here in the big cities, not in the country. Their children are now getting to the age where they're thinking of secondary school or even university, so they're going to come
more
back.
Facilities.
There's more. There's much more. So now, and Melbourne and Sydney are the two main focuses,
main places where they go to. Now, in terms of these owners of multiple practices, from their point of view, where's their appetite? City or regional, or it doesn't really matter?
Some of see that the regions were the areas that were growing because particularly during COVID, people were moving out, and there was this sense of that people were decentralised, becoming more
work from home. You don't have to work in the office every day. Yeah.
So they're looking at practices that are in larger towns.
Yeah. What do you call
20, 30,000 people, maybe something like that. Either or close by those towns, where there is growth in population, and often practices were owned by older doctors who are in that retirement situation, so they can take them over.
Okay.
Often some of them were quite large, physically, lots of rooms, which are good because you can put more doctors in, obviously. And so there are a number of groups who were working towards that model.
Mm-hmm.
Other less so. They don't care where they are.
So do they get any benefit for going into regional area? That's called, they used to call
DWS.
DW.
District of Workforce Shortage.
And what's it called now?
Distribution Priority Area, which is DPA.
So these corporate buyers, for lack of a better word, do they get any benefits by running practices in those areas?
Yeah, there's more likely that they're going to pick up doctors in those areas, because when we were importing doctors on a regular basis pre-COVID, then those doctors would be easy to find
and recruit. Yeah, and they don't want to run the business; they just want to work. And
correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. Now, having said that, some of the doctors who went to those country areas ended up buying practices in those country areres
and staying there because they established themselves there. Yeah,
they love it.
Fantastic.
They don't have to be in the city, and some of them, the quality of life is fantastic, and so it makes a lot of sense.
Now, from the point of value, regional practices versus metropolitan practices, is there any difference?
Like most things, I think in our business, that regional businesses can be much harder to sell, and you have
to apply some discount in order to entice people because less demand.
Correct, and I would say the same thing for some smaller practices in the country, 1 or 2 doctors, 3 doctors maximum. They become harder to sell than the same size practice in the city.
So there's less demand in regional areas.
Yeah. And changes that are taking place to this DPA situation, where the areas are contracting. In other words, that the non-DPA areas are closer and closer to the city. So some of the fringe areas that were sort of not DPA, not DPA, suddenly are DPA. You've got to talk about.
Okay, I understand. So it used to be 20 kilometers from CBD, but
it was more like
50.
It was 50. Now it's 30.
Okay.
So in Victoria, for instance, where I am, Frankston, which is a major sort of area, is now DPA. Not all of it, but a significant part of it is, and then other places around there.
That affects more regional practices and affects the value of them
so
as well.
So the negativity is that if the DPA areas are closer to the major cities, capital cities, Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo, etc. in Victoria, then the smaller areas are going to suffer because those doctors are not going to stay there.
Okay. And what about the size of the practices?
Look,
and value. How does that affect the value?
Okay. A single doctor practice is really, really hard to sell.
Yeah.
Unless that doctor's happy to stay and continue to work. But most of the single doctor practices, because they've been on their own for some time, they are more likely to want to just say, I'll do 6 months and I'm out. I just need to retire.
So why is that the case? Why are they harder to sell?
Because without that doctor and the
business.
difficulty of finding other doctors, there is no goodwill left.
Especially if you're in a regional area.
Correct.
Would it be easier in the city?
It's a little bit, but my experience has been that it's very hard to sell them. What we have done over 2 or 3 occasions, I think now maybe 4, is take that single doctor and literally move them to another practice close by, a couple of kilometres or so, because we don't want to inconvenience patients, and they join another practice. Now,
so the practice buys them but brings them over to them.
Because what they're buying is they're buying the patients and the doctor. Okay, so they're saying, well, I can bring another doctor in. It gives me another doctor to see not only his own patients but probably some new patients. And that doctor can actually do better in a financial sense because they're able to do more procedures, to take on some of interest that they might be interested in inside, like mental health or whatever, skin care, mole checks and things like that, because they've got the support, because there's usually more nurses, there's more administrative staff, etc. in there.
So from buyer's point of view, by having all these different services, you actually
becomes a one-stop shop for the
One-stop
patient.
shop, so increasing the income that you can generate out of it.
We've done some good sales, but recently it seems that the buyers, because they're more corporate in this sense, they're more reluctant to actually want to pay some upfront goodwill payment
for
moving that doctor across.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do is to see and fashion a deal where they're getting 70% of their gross.
Yeah.
And that 70% can be paid just as 70%.
Yep.
Or they can give them some part of that 70% as a capital payment.
Okay. Because it affects their taxes. And
Exactly. Now, I've got one at the moment where the practice is, I think we started about 85, so it goes before the CGT. And we couldn't get, all we got was enough money to cover our commission, and then the rest of it was to be paid off as 20%.
So it doesn't have to pay commission out of the pocket, and then it's paid over a period of time.
Correct.
Now, in terms of these smaller practices, what I know in selling any general business, when you're selling something that's, you're selling a job which is normally you're working at, and the income, the profit, including your wages that the job generates, it's either same as what you can get by working for somebody else, or slightly more than that. Where's that limit for the doctors?
It's estimated that a general practitioner working at, let's say, 38 hours a week should be able to generate about 400 to 450,000. Okay. So that is probably in a mixed billing clinic. Okay. Say. So out of that, they might get 70%.
Okay.
So let's say that 70% of 400,000 is what, 300
some 78, and 10. Yeah.
Something like that. So if you were working in a practice as the boss and you were generating your own $300,000 of income, and then you're getting the 30% that's coming across from each of the doctors that are subcontracted, then that 30% is paying all the overheads.
Yeah.
Now, if you're disciplined, then you would do exactly the same. You would get your 70% and the rest would go into that. So at the end of the day, it's estimated that between, maybe let's call it 12 to 15% of turnover is your net profit.
Okay, so of the total turnover.
So let's say there are 5 doctors, all generating $2 million.
Yeah.
It's 400,000, makes $2 million.
Yeah. So it's kind of rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so if the doctor runs single doctor practice and generates, say, which I have seen in the past, 250,000 profit for the doctor operator. How much would something like that sell for?
1 times.
1 times, and that's top.
Yeah, maybe even less.
So if you're in regional, you have to discount further in order to entice somebody else. And the reason for that is because I can go and get just work for somebody else and let them worry about all the administration and marketing and everything else that goes with it.
There were articles written in medical trade papers some time ago. Why aren't young doctors buying medical practices? And this was one of the reasons. It was a generational thing. So the Gen X's and Gen Y's, they don't want to have the buy a practice
and burden of running a business. If
correct. I can earn $300,000 a year or more, and I walk home every night knowing that I'm
switch off the lights and feel someone else switches off.
Absolutely, somebody else switches off the lights. Yeah, and I go home, I'm happy.
Yeah,
and yes, I'm probably thinking about patients and all that sort of stuff, but I don't have to worry about the business side of things.
So let me ask you a different question. Let's say we got something that's got 5 doctors. And 1 doctor is the owner, but it's not run that well, and I still only generate 300,000 because all these guys are part-time and whatnot. Is it possible to sell it for a little bit more than 1 times?
Oh yeah, I think on a 4 or 5 doctor practice, and you usually work in full-time equivalents.
Yeah.
So out of that 5, it might be 3 full-time equivalents.
Okay.
Okay. So So 3 full-time equivalents makes some sense because it's generating 1.2, 1.3 million and a reasonable EBITDA at the end of it.
So even, let me understand these full-time equivalents, and for the others that are listening to this, does that mean if all of them are working full-time, or does that mean, well, we got 5, but we are equivalent to 3 full-time?
So you've got 5 doctors.
Yeah.
The principal usually works, let's say, 38 hours a week.
Yeah.
Highly unlikely. He's probably work 45 or 60. Yeah. You've got one female doctor who's got kids.
Yeah.
Who does 24 hours a week.
Yeah.
We've got somebody else who's there 36 hours a week. We've got somebody else who's only there 1 day a week.
Yeah.
Whatever. So you add it all up, divide by 38.
Yeah.
And that gives you your full-time equivalents.
Okay.
Okay. So a lot of the corporates actually talk, they don't talk in
numbers
of practices, they talk in the number of doctors they've got and how many full-time equivalent doctors they've got. So they might be aiming for a target of, let's say, 30 or 40 or 50 doctors across their practice.
Okay. So if I got a practice and I got a 5 full-time equivalent, we said that they can generate about, well, let's say 4, they're going to generate about 400. Not 5, generate 400, it's going to give me about 2 million.
Yep.
And you think it's about 15% EBITDA?
Maybe.
Well, depends how well it's run, where it is, how much is the rent and everything else.
One of the things that is worth noting that there is software available which can be plugged into a practice, particularly if they're using best practices, their practice software, and Xero in particular, that can tell you how well the practice is running. Because I always used to joke that you could show me 2 practices with the same numbers, face value numbers, but delving deeply and working out how
they're going to have a different value, because
absolutely different value. So these software packages don't just do things like handle payments and reconciliations and things like that. They actually tell the doctors, the practice owners, how well the practice is running, how efficiently it's running, utilisation of doctors, utilisation of rooms. Are we contacting the right number of patients to get more services to those patients, which you're allowed to do. I mean, it's not. This is not.
It's a business.
It's a business, but it's a legitimate way of saying, well, your patients over 65 or over 60 or whatever.
There's some checks that we should do to prevent.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you mentioned these efficiencies in the software, and you mentioned room utilization. So, what's the general rule of thumb? I mean, you can't utilize anything 100%. You can one day, but on the long run, it's gonna. What are we expecting utilization of doctors, and are there anything that we can say to listeners? Some numbers to give them an idea where they sit.
It's hard to know because it depends on how many rooms you've got, and then compare that with how many doctors you've got.
Yeah.
So if you've got 5 rooms and 5 doctors, and they're all working full time, then you do have 100% utilisation. But as we've said, it may not be the case. You might have that room available 2 days a week. There's no doctor there.
They're going to have 7 rooms and 5 doctors.
Correct. Yeah. So if you've got 2 sessions, say, because a session is like afternoon or morning, you can put an allied health practitioner, podiatrist or a psychologist or whatever, charge that room out at a reasonable rate or work on the same sort of percentage or slightly different percentage.
Oops.
Carry
on. Okay. I told you to switch off the phone.
My phone's not here. So we'll cut that bit out.
All right. No, we're going to leave it.
Okay. I think like most hospitality businesses, hotels, you're aiming for a percentage where you're making profit on the rooms that you've got available. What you don't want is to have 1 doctor and 5 rooms, and the 4 rooms are empty.
Yes,
that's not efficient.
But from the buyer's point of view, when they're looking at something like, okay, just trying to find the value in the businesses. So let's say let's say doctor contemplating of selling a practice, and he does have 5 rooms, but he only generates 250,000 because a few years ago it was much bigger practice.
Yeah,
and
people die and people retire.
Well, let's say people won a lotto and they retire for that reason. But for whichever reason, there's less doctors now. I have seen these things. When you're looking at the practice that's only making 200, 250, it's hard to sell, and it's not going to generate that much value for the exiting doctor. But if it does have a potential to increase to 5, and I hate that word potential in business sales because it's the most trying word out there.
Yeah.
But definitely it's got to 5 rooms that you can expand the business.
There are upsides to it, that you've got capacity. So you've got rooms that could be used.
I think they will make that business easier to sell.
I think so too.
But the question is, would it generate better price?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Because again, we sell a business based on what it's done.
Yeah, blue sky upside belongs to the buyer.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they say, yeah, look, I think I can do this. I've got access.
But it may not going to work.
It may not work. But if they're confident that they've got access to doctors, and it's interesting. It's that, the phrase, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
If you gradually build up a practice, then you will attract doctors to come to that practice because they can see that it's a growing practice and it's well run and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
If you've got a practice where it gets around that the doctors are barely making enough money, no one's going to join that practice.
Correct, yeah.
It's like most things. But because don't forget, these are independent contractors.
Yeah.
They're not going to work if they're not earning any money.
If there's nothing in it for them, or if they can get more elsewhere.
Yeah.
Now, what are the value drivers? When what the buyers are looking for, and I want to lead into what somebody who's selling a practice can do to actually, obviously, profit comes down to, but rather than profit, what are other value drivers to general practitioners?
Well,
businesses?
I think profit is seen in different ways because if you can get legitimately a profit at 17 or 18% or even 20%, then one of the things you're looking for is saying, well, okay, why is that higher than other practices that are turning over roughly the same sort of money, but they're not getting that sort of level of profit? And the reason is that they're more efficient.
Okay.
Their staffing is probably better. They're not overstaffed, but they're not understaffed.
Okay, so not just in doctors' practices and medical businesses, but in businesses in generally. Is efficiency better or worse when I'm buying a business? Because talking from buyer's point of view, if I see that something is not efficient, maybe I can capitalize on that in future.
And that's what the corporates are working. Their premise is, their idea is that we can make it better. I've got a corporate group that I have a lot of experience working with, small group. Yeah. Sold them one practice already. Yeah. Where they're not so much worried about the expense side of things because they'll plug in their numbers from what they know that they can do, and they'll then check that against the income, and they'll say, we using our methodologies, our efficiencies, we can make more money than these guys because we can run it better.
But nevertheless, they're not going to pay for that.
Absolutely not.
Or they'll try not to pay.
Yeah,
so if you run the process of selling practice properly and you go more than one buyer, you may gonna be able to use that to your advantage to maximize value on the end.
And I've always said that value is in the eye of the beholder. You know what I mean? In other words...
Well, to some... it is. Otherwise, no one's going to buy the business unless they see the value.
$100,000 could be totally out of somebody's thought processes. But if they will spend $200,000 or $300,000 because they get a better business.
Correct. But also, my experience is that the buyer only wants to pay $1 more than what he thinks that somebody else is going to pay. Because even though that I know what I'm going to do with the business, well, I want to pay. It's just a business. I want to pay as little as possible when I enter.
Yeah. Pre-COVID days, I think we were fairly conservative in the way we appraised and valued businesses, particularly medical businesses. Yeah. But it was 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, we were getting more than we thought it was worth.
Yeah.
Because there was demand and people were willing to spend it. That's not the case today. People will only spend what they really think they want to spend. You know,
look, I give this advice to buyers often. Absolutely, don't go and overpay for the business. But 10% up or down, it doesn't really matter. Because if I get into negotiation and I'm thinking the business is worth $1 million, but the seller wants 1.1, and I walk away of the deal because of 100,000, and then I spend another 12 months looking for another business, consider lost opportunity as well. So sometimes paying a little bit better just to get moved, because like time is finite, and you have to use it. You don't have forever. Like once we're in the market, you're gonna find the market, and there's not that much at any given time that's being sold. People think there's an unlimited number of the businesses. Well, there's something like 30,000, 40,000 businesses at any given time on the market. Some estimates, I don't know how accurate they are, but it's a lot. But you're not looking for any business, you're looking for specific business. So all of a sudden the number dwindles lower. Then you look at further and you say, well, hang on a minute, I'm not looking to buy anything in Western Australia. I actually want to buy something in a certain region of Victoria. So all of a sudden there's 3 businesses out there, and the choices are not. Sometimes you have to pay a little bit extra. And going back to your values in the eyes of beholder, it's not an exact science, and emotions come into it, and personal needs. So sometimes you pay a little bit more, a little bit less.
Yeah, I mean, I had a situation where we had a practice on the market. I think I valued it 670. The owner was hoping to get 700. We got an offer of 820.
Well, there you go. It's all you're doing.
But
so what happened? Why?
The vendor rejected the offer.
Why is that? He came too quickly.
I think he got cold feet.
Yeah.
I think he was ill-advised by other people.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Look, there's a lot of war stories like that we have to talk about, but let's stay with the facts, all right? One thing that happens, and you touched on it, this efficiency and how people analyze businesses, but when the buyer finds a business, how does the due diligence look like? What information they want? What my experience with the due diligence in the last, say, 18 months since COVID, that because we don't have a flat trading, there was downs and there was ups in some businesses, that the due diligence goes into way more details now. They're looking at the stuff in any business which go back pre-COVID, no one even considered looking at it. So as a consequence of that, what happens, we find a buyer, we agree, they put some high-level offer, and then we go in due diligence, and on the end of the due diligence, either offer looks totally different, or the final amount that business sells for looks totally different, or the business just doesn't, we don't end up in sell. So what are people, which I think it's really important to everybody that is listening to this, what are buyers are looking for? What information, and how does the due diligence look like?
Okay, so like any business, I think it's going to go back to source material.
Yep.
So bank statements, BAS, all those sort of things.
Yep.
Straightforward. There is the ability to interrogate practice software.
Yep.
And as I said, there is other software which can be applied to the practice to find out more information, which will give you those efficiencies, etc. I think that certainly what people are looking for is, what is the real income? What is the real way that this practice generates the money that it does? You know, and so you've highlighted COVID as being the major example. Is to make sure that we remove JobKeeper, we remove cash flow boosts and all that sort of stuff.
But we also have to remove the losses due to COVID. You talked about,
absolutely.
You were sitting for now in the car park, and then when they call you, it takes time to go there. So instead of seeing 10 patients in the same period of time, I can see only 7 because they have to travel. So there's 30%. So those adjustments do happen.
So I mean, I've just done an evaluation recently where we looked at those months where they did have that definite 30% decrease in income.
Yeah.
And others we didn't allow them to keep the JobKeeper, so to speak. So there are ways to do that. I think what people are looking for is as I said, I think earlier, what are the actual billings of the doctors?
Yeah.
So if we lose
which doctor?
And which doctor. So you look at each of the doctors. You're looking at where the other incomes come from. What is, because other income can be lots of different things.
Would it be a good idea if you got a multiple doctors practice to actually start passing on some of your patients to other doctors within the practice before you sell it, or that doesn't really matter? It's more you staying and helping with the transition.
Like most businesses, the more owner-centric the business is, the harder they are to sell. Yeah. So you would like to see that the principal doctor is not the one generating the most income. Okay? Yep. So you'd like to think that if you took the 100% of what they generate and you got 5 doctors, he's not generating 30 or 40% of that total.
Well, let me ask you a different question. Is it better to have, say, 4 doctors, or so you got a principal doctor and another 4 doctors, full-time equivalent to 2, or to have a principal doctor and 2? The reason why I'm thinking, you got 4 doctors, so if 2 of them leave, you still can run the practice. So is it better to have a doctors?
It's always better to have more doctors.
More doctors.
Yeah.
So part-time than full-time.
If you work out, if one of those 3 doctors, so you got the principal plus the 2, if one of those other 2 leaves, you've lost a 30%, 33% of your...
Well, that's on condition that you can't find a replacement and everything else, but you got a problem.
But if you've got 5 or 6 doctors, the loss of one doctor is...
And the others can pick up slack.
And they can, absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Absolutely. And sometimes the fact that you have lost a doctor means that people will start to say, I can do an extra couple of hours a day and I can make lots more money.
And so if somebody buys a practice, what's the expectation? How do buyers look at calculation going forward of, well, I'll buy a practice, but, okay, if I keep 100% of the clients, that's fantastic.
Wonderful.
But is there any calculation of what the contingencies they're putting in place? What are they expecting they're going to lose?
It's such a hard thing to really quantify. But what I've done in the past, and I think we should all do this in all businesses anyway, but certainly in medical practices, is not just to look at the principal. Because the principal can say, I'll stay for 3 years. Fantastic.
Yeah.
They might cut down their hours a bit, but at least they're going to be seen and be around and everybody sees that the practice is continuing. But the other doctors, you might have 3 or 4, let's say you got 4 doctors plus the owner.
Yep.
So each one of those doctors has to be assessed as their age and their likelihood that they're going to, in the next 2 years, retire. What's holding them to the area? Have they got family, kids at school, mortgages to pay, all that sort of stuff? How is their general health, et cetera, et cetera? So you can start to say, okay, based on what I now know about the profiles of all of the doctors, I think the likelihood is we might lose 1 doctor.
Or the risk is lower or the risk is higher.
Correct.
So it would be good practice when you're selling doctor's surgery to actually put a little kind of bio or analysis of every individual doctor.
We've got what's called a medical practice profile, which we ask the vendors to complete. It doesn't just have how long, the hours the doctors work. How long have they been with the practice? How old are they? So that we start to get a picture. Hold on, they're all over 65. That might be. Well,
you have to start thinking about how am I going to replace these people in 5, 6, 7, 10 years when they decide that they don't want to work anymore.
Hopefully they'll stay for at least 5 years, and some doctors will keep working until you literally carry them out on an ambulance trolley, Yeah. But some will decide to leave for whatever. Might be family reasons, move interstate to be with children or something like that. There's all these reasons. So having a look at the practice And this is why I said to you, sometimes you can look at the raw numbers, you think, oh, they're pretty close. And then you realise that one practice has got some risks associated with it that the other one doesn't. A younger profile, an older profile, some issues, and all that system.
Look, occupancy or security of tenure, leases, very important.
Absolutely. We're lucky in a lot of cases that the practitioners own the building.
Well, yeah, multiple doctor practices will own the building, but it's not always the case.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I have seen deals fall over because we couldn't get a new
I got
lease.
a beautiful practice in Melbourne. We've had a number of people go through the practice. No one's criticised it in terms of the way it's set up, etc. It has 6 or 7 doctors, but a low full-time equivalence.
Yep.
And what's going to kill this is the rent is astronomical because it's a big practice. It's 400, it's nearly 500 square metres.
Is it possible to be moved in that case? Let's say, well,
the owners own the building, so they don't want to move. They don't want somebody to come in and say, we'll move it to somewhere else.
It's a problem with a lot of businesses now. It becomes an issue. If I drop the rent, I drop the value of the real estate.
Well, we've all had those, where the owners sold the building based on the fact that they put the rent up to themselves, so that anybody buying that practice is now confronted with a very high rent.
Very high rent, and ratios don't work out.
Some years ago we did one in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne where the guys actually challenged the landlord because their rent had just gone up incrementally over a number of years, that it was no longer commercially
viable, and there was no rent.
And they won the case. They won the case. So it made it much easier to sell the.
So the advice to sellers out there, if you're in a situation like that, try to fix those problems, because buyer always got an option. He just doesn't buy the business.
Yeah, but if the practice is worth, let's say, $500,000, and the property's worth $3.5 million, they're going to protect the $3.5 million, not the $5 million.
I know you're going to protect the $3.5 million, but are you going to be able to sell the business? And look, sometimes that's a good idea.
Well, there's a packaging process here.
Sell a business for less money, but capitalize on real estate. Just make sure that that continues, because if you're having 3 + 3 + 3, purchaser of the practice may going to decide to move on somewhere else. So you lost the money on the business, and now you're losing a value in the property. So it really needs to be weighed out properly.
I think there's a balancing act, and I mean I've sold practices and property together.
Now let me ask you about radiologies.
Radiology practices.
Yes.
Yeah. Heavily corporatized.
Yeah.
But there are some smaller groups, independents around. Yeah.
When you say groups, multiple
places? 4 or 5 locations. I don't know if you call them practices, but 4 or 5 locations. Obviously doing very similar procedures.
Yep.
Heavily capitalised, because the equipment is not cheap.
Yep.
And if you want to offer the best level of service, then you're going to have to put in the best equipment.
I believe newer equipment you got, more you get paid for.
Yeah, I think
rebates.
I think so.
And but look, good thing about that is that you can raise the money against this, because there's a lot of institutions that will lend money against that equipment.
Mm-hmm. So
while it's heavily capitalized, you can actually leverage against that as well.
Yeah.
And is a big demand for them?
I would have thought, again, during COVID, that they would have not been as busy as they would have been pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
That they would have been, not everybody would have wanted to go to a radiology practice unless they really needed to go.
Or had to, yeah.
Yeah, so that would have affected it. You can get bulk billing in radiology, or there are some procedures where you can't get bulk billing unless it's referred through a doctor who can refer that. MRI is, I think, one of those that is very expensive if you don't get it referred and get it through. I mean, I had an MRI years ago. I had to travel 30 or 40 Ks to get it done, but it didn't cost me.
Okay.
But radiology practices, so it's heavily capitalised. You need highly qualified staff. So you've got both radiographers, who are the technicians, who can do the original testing and then do the initial review of the X-rays, and then you've got the radiologists who sign off on those X-rays or whatever you've got. And then you can have specialists, so ultrasonography.
So in this industry, do they operate similar to doctors when they actually do share billing, like doctor takes 70%, house takes 30%, or they're full-time employees?
The ones that I've seen, I did evaluation on some years ago, they were paid purely as employees. So they got significant amount of money, but they're highly qualified, and there's, dare I say, if you took in terms of professional medical indemnity, these guys are almost at the top next to anaesthetists, because if they don't pick something up, there's a problem. So that's an issue there.
But in terms of selling of those businesses, there's a good demand, they transact?
Well, if it's making lots of money, then I think it's a prime target for a corporate, one of the big ones, the IMEDs and people like that, although they do change names in different states. I think they have similar ownership.
Okay. And doctor specialists, that's really hard to sell, virtually impossible.
As close to impossible as you can get, I think, unless, and this is something I've just come across recently, where a particular type of practice treated its specialists as independent contractors. Mm-hmm. So you actually had a real business.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a whole collection of individuals earning their own money and occupying a bit of space and maybe contributing a little bit to overhead. This is a proper profit-making business.
Okay, so if it's a run not as individual specialist, but if it's a run like a business, they are sellable.
Yeah. There's cardiology groups, there's orthopedic groups, there's dermatology groups, there's ophthalmology groups, I think, as well, and plastic surgeons and a whole range of people. They create these, what I would call proper businesses.
Yeah.
And they have a brand name.
And they run them as a business.
Correct.
And there's management and administration, marketing.
But a single, be it any practitioner, a dermatologist or whoever it is, literally just running their own rooms or multiple rooms, because often they move around and they've got some hospital appointments as well. There seems to be an unwritten law that no one pays goodwill for them. They'll buy the assets, but they're not going to pay any goodwill.
Correct.
Because once that doctor stops practicing, the referrals don't suddenly come to the guy who steps into those shoes. Yeah,
you refer to the doctor, not the business.
Correct. So, doctor's retired, they'll find another person to refer to.
Now,
in country towns, that may be slightly different because there's the limited number of specialists. Somebody comes in and takes over that specialty, they may get all those referrals from that city, that country town.
Okay. Now, if somebody's thinking of selling their medical business, what would you give them as an advice going forward? What do they need to know or do, or how to prepare themselves? Well,
there's two parts to this, I think. There's the physical presence, the practice itself.
Yeah.
Is it attractive? Can somebody move in and not spend any money on it?
Okay.
Is it big enough to have some growth in it? Has it got an extra couple of rooms, or can we do some modifications or whatever the case may be to make it look good?
So if it isn't, if you make sure that those things exist before you take a business to work, okay?
Obviously the financials are, like any business, are critical.
Yeah.
So are we calculating on an EBITDA or what we call an owner's earnings or proprietor's earnings to understand, to make sure that when we do put it to the market, the buyers know which one we're referring to. Because I've had cases where we've clearly identified it as proprietor's earnings, but everybody then says, I can't make it work because I'm not going to be working in there to earn my own money.
Just to clarify that for people that are not on top of these terminologies and numbers, proprietor's earnings include wage for the working owner.
Correct.
EBITDA, for lack of a better word, is your profit after you pay yourself a wage.
Yeah. So that's the difference. So the doctor who's an owner, going to be an owner operator, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Looks at a practice and says, okay, I can work in that practice. But if I'm working in that practice and I'm going to keep everybody there, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take somebody else's earnings. So it doesn't quite work that I'm going to come in and grow the practice, because unless you can get more and more patients in,
Because they're going to pay other people less, and they're not going to be happy.
They're not going to be happy about it. So there's that little balancing act that comes on. So what I always suggest to people, if they're selling a practice, make sure that you do have a finite agreement that says you're going to work a certain number of hours a week, you're going to get paid a certain percentage, and that you're going to last a certain amount of time.
Okay.
That gives the buyer then can gradually take over and build it.
So first part is fix the
property,
fix the appearance, fix the property.
Make sure all your financials are up to date.
Yeah.
I always say complete, accurate, and timely.
Okay.
They're the three major things.
Okay, so complete the contracts, make sure all the contracts are in place, all the agreements are...
All the service agreements are in place. There are lots of practices around who don't have service agreements. It's all handshake stuff.
Yeah.
Okay?
So try not to have that sort of arrangement when you take business to the market.
Correct. Because straight away, the purchaser, and I've had this on numerous occasions, the purchaser will say, show us the service agreements. Because we want to see the terms and conditions so that we're comfortable with taking over these people.
And the seller says,
I haven't got it. Service agreement? What's the service agreement?
Yeah.
And you say, well, the owners, the purchasers will want to talk to the doctors. Oh, no, they can't talk to the doctors until we sell it. And then the purchaser...
So, okay, I don't have a service agreement.
I'm
taking your word for it. Exactly. Well, I can see something from the financial how it's paid, but it's still not as clear.
But the problem is that the doctors who've worked under the no service agreement scenario, if you put a service agreement in front of them, suddenly feel threatened. Rightly or wrongly.
Well, why are you doing it to me? Like,
hey, don't you trust me anymore? You know, that's sort of thing. And that can be a big problem.
And especially after the sale. So you just, I don't know the guy that I'm entering into business with, and may not going to work out very well.
You know, this guy might be the biggest thief alive. This guy
or this corporation or this person.
Whatever. You know, I don't know. Am I going to like working here? See, a lot of practices, I don't think about this in terms of culture.
Well, most of the businesses don't. You run the business and we take it to the market.
But you know straight away the successful businesses have great culture.
And it's transferable.
They have longevity of staff.
Yeah.
They have longevity of doctors.
Yeah.
Everybody seems, the waiting rooms are always full.
Okay.
And it looks good and it feels good. The staff, and you got this sense that, hey, this is a nicely run practice.
It feels good.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Other practices, and sometimes they lack a bit of soul. They're colder. They don't have that warmth about them, and
they're too small.
And sometimes it's because the owners are absent. Others, it's because they haven't thought about the peripheral things. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like some practices. You look at the websites, and it's like somebody says, "I've got to have a website." So they put a website up, and there's nothing there. There's no sense of being different. You know, they list all the things they do.
On that note, I mean, I never Googled doctor and went on a doctor, but I did Google some allied practitioners. How much is the website's online present testimonials? How important is that to general practitioner, or is it important? Well, it helps.
Okay,
right?
let's think.
How important it is.
You know, doctors are not allowed to advertise.
Okay.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
But they've all got websites now. So what are they doing? They're advertising. So if you're going to advertise, then you have enough information there on your website that informs the patient about who you are, what you do, and how you do it. Okay? Allied Health, other specialists might turn up and work 1 day a week or something like that. So you have all that thing. Then you make sure that they can book appointments either through your site or connecting to HotDoc or Health Engine. Okay. So that's another service that you provide. So there's a lot of stuff. And then you can have just general stuff. I mean, I've seen doctors who've had Facebook pages and things like that. I don't know whether that's as critical, because what you don't want is a bad Facebook score.
And you're always going to get somebody bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to do some sort of online presence. That's not that expensive these days.
No,
You can
but
employ,
some of the older doctors haven't quite grasped.
but you don't have to do it. You just got to employ somebody who can put this
Correct.
together
Correct.
for a reasonable amount of money, and all of a sudden you've got a presence
Yeah.
that helps when you're selling a business.
We've got a small practice we've just started selling in Melbourne.
Yep.
2 older doctors, husband and wife. She used to work elsewhere and only work part-time. Now she works sort of more only at this practice.
Yep.
They're in their 80s.
Yep.
They haven't got a web page. Is it critical? No, because they've been so damn long, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows them. They've been there in that area for 35, 40 years or something like that. So that's less important than somebody who's trying to, if you start a new practice, then you do all the social media stuff.
And look, if you don't have that, it gives opportunity for incoming doctor to actually improve on it.
Correct.
Yes.
And some practices, and there's one out of Sydney that I've become working with in the past, they actually provide apps for the patient.
And what does the app do?
The app tells them about things, reminds them of things, your appointments, push and pull. So it's telling them to do things and to come into the practice to do things, etc., etc. And it gives them information.
Look, there's a lot of technology that doctors can use nowadays, and not just doctors, any business. But if that technology, I would argue that unless the technology helps you make more profit, it's not really that relevant when you're selling a business.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No, I 100% agree. I mean, you can find out lots and lots of things, but if you don't use that information to your benefit, then it's worthless.
But if the technology works, it should bring more profit, so it's going to improve your practice value.
It's like if you ask an expert and the expert gives you an answer and then you say, nah.
You don't use it.
Well, you might not have. Why ask the question in the first place? If you're not going to you paid somebody money to give you a measured response to a question, then you would expect that you would take that knowledge and use it to your advantage. And the same thing goes with the software that's available. There's Cubico, there's KPIs, there's other software surgical partners that all helps you run your practice more efficiently. Doesn't make mistakes when it comes to paying doctors.
Implement the stuff that software suggesting, or use the tool.
Here's a gap.
The stuff.
Here's a gap. Okay, how can we then use that information? So we've got to contact everybody that fits in that little profile.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. So software itself won't help you sell a business better, but implementing
it could, because it could pick out those areas where we spoke about the horrible word potential.
Yeah.
Somebody's saying, hold on, this is where they're not doing this.
But
so we will do that, and we will make that money.
I think you shouldn't wait for somebody else to pay for that, but you should implement and use those tools to improve the practice, get more efficient, and make more money.
We've all had, not just in the medical profession, let's not get ourselves, it happens across the whole vendor markets place, is that vendors will say, here's the basic minimum information, I'm not giving you any more. Because I know how good my business is, and they can use that, and that's
so.
And doctors are no different. I've had cases where it's like dragging stuff out of them.
There's a good advice that software and provide information to
be
whoever.
Proactive.
Be proactive. Provide information to the buyers. Provide information to your advisor, so you can put a good package that's clear and transparent, so that the buyer can assess the practice properly and pay the best price for it.
We've all had this argument over what is really due diligence and what is discovery.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think it's blurring the edges now.
Look, I hear what you're saying. So discovery is understanding a business, and then once when we understand the business, then we do the due diligence.
The due diligence is a verification process.
Correct. And where the danger is, if information is not detailed enough, you may gonna...
They're suspicious.
Well, not only that. Like, let's say they're not suspicious, but buyer may have a different picture of the business in their head, and after doing a detailed due diligence, they will find the stuff that wasn't that they missed at the beginning. Not that it wasn't given to them, but sometimes it wasn't given to them. Sometimes it was given to them, but not enough details that they actually see it now in a different light. And there is no other option but to adjust the price and walk away from the deal. So good advice for everybody who's selling a business. Spend some time putting everything together. Get a detailed information about your practice. We're talking about doctor's practice, doctor's surgeries, and give that to the buyer. Process is going to be much easier, much faster, and they won't be this ugly surprised after due diligence that somebody drops a price.
Okay. I have a particular view that says I don't have to give them everything up front. We still write an information memorandum, a sales memo, whatever you want to call it, and it contains enough information that gets their interest going. But be prepared to have the other stuff ready to roll.
So you can do it in stages.
And you just do that.
First stage is to get them interested. Second stage to know a little bit more. Third stage is to give them everything, and then due diligence comes in.
Okay. If you sell a house, I know sometimes these analogies are not wonderful.
I don't like it, but okay.
Let me go. Somebody says, the agent says to you, a coat of paint would be wonderful. You give it a coat of paint, whatever it cost you to have it painted, you made 3 times that amount in the price that you sold the house for. Potentially. It's not dissimilar, because I get a lot of people saying, every time I talk to my accountant, it costs me money. Well, I'm saying to them, if you don't talk to your accountant, you're going to not make money. You're going to lose money. You're going to lose money. And that's the problem, I think, that some people would see. It's that very short-sighted that I don't want to spend that money. But it's an investment.
It's investment, correct.
And so spend the money, get your accountant to prepare the documentation properly, and then we can go to the buyers.
But it's not just accountant, your administration team, if you got one or a few people in administration.
Well, this is the other side of it.
Can actually produce these documents.
Who should know in the practice of the practices on the market?
Who should know?
Should the practice manager know? Because I've had practice managers walk. As soon as they know the practice is on the market, they walk.
Why would they walk?
Because they're scared that somebody else is going to come in and make their job redundant.
So they quit.
They quit.
That doesn't make sense.
I know it doesn't make sense, but it happens. It doesn't have to make sense.
Well, look, you should know. You don't have to tell them why you need this information, but if you... come on, there's nothing wrong asking about the information, about give me breakup of my clients, who they are, and everything else. Accountant won't help you with that. You probably can't even use your software. So somebody within the practice
depends. I've got a practice which I asked them some questions on doctors' billings, and they didn't go to their practice software. They went to the accountant.
Well,
and the accountant,
if the accountant,
2 seconds gave me
fantastic.
The information.
If the accountant is on the top of that, okay.
But they're willing to spend a certain amount a month to be able to present that information for them, both for themselves and for anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the investment that they've decided to make. They're spending more with their accountant than they've ever spent before, but they're getting hell of a lot more information, and it's valuable information. It's something you can use.
And I have seen this in the past, not just like with any businesses. More information is given to buyer, easier is that for them to make a decision, and they pay a little bit extra just because they want to buy the business. Finally, they find something they can understand, because they understand that they trust it, and they are prepared to pay a little bit extra just to get over through the process of buying a business and get into the business.
My view at the moment is that if somebody asks you for that information, they don't want it just to be bloody minded, if you know what I mean, and make it hard. They want it for a particular reason. They've either got somebody who's looking at it on their behalf, who's going to keep asking them questions about it. So, as I said earlier, it's better to be proactive than reactive.
Absolutely.
Yes, there's always somebody comes up with a question, God, I never thought of that before, or they've asked it in a different way, or they want.
But there's a reason why they're asking. What they're trying to do is to get into the business, and this is all intangible. And the only way I can do this is through getting information, examining data, to actually understand it, so I can assess the investment.
Correct.
Larry, it was really good talking to you.
It's been fantastic.
I got a lot out of this talk, and I hope others will.
I hope so too.
And just as a closing, if somebody wants to sell their doctor's surgery, doctor's practice, how do they find you?
Through the website,
Yeah.
exclusive.com.au, or they can call me directly.
Give us your phone number.
0414 824 333.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Zoran.
Need help selling your business, buying a business, or a business valuation? Exclusive Business Sales award-winning team are here to help. Our experience, skill, expertise, and professionalism, backed by our triple guarantee, is assurance for your success. The largest network of buyers and our national coverage will help you throughout Australia in all state capitals and regional areas. Exclusive Business Sales. Sell your business with certainty.